On a crisp October morning in 2022, the Appalachian Trail was shrouded in a golden glow as the sun broke through the canopy of red and yellow foliage. The trail stretched for miles, a network of paths weaving through some of the most remote wilderness in the eastern United States. It was the kind of day that drew seasoned hikers to the woods, the air cool and invigorating, the forest alive with the quiet rustle of leaves and the distant calls of birds. Mark Russell, a 36-year-old outdoor enthusiast, had embarked on a solo trek through one of the most isolated sections of the trail. Experienced and well-prepared, Mark had spent years exploring remote wildernesses, thriving on solitude and the challenge of surviving on his own. He carried a small but efficient pack: water, protein bars, a first aid kit, and a lightweight tarp, just enough to sustain him for his 3-day hike. The morning had gone smoothly as Mark moved along the trail, his boots crunching against the dirt and scattered leaves. The forest was serene, its silence broken only by the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. Around midday, Mark came upon a secluded stream, its crystal-clear water flowing gently over smooth stones. The spot was perfect for a rest. He crouched by the bank, filled his water bottle using a filter, and sat on a nearby log to eat a snack. Unbeknownst to Mark, he was not alone. A black bear, lean and desperate from weeks of dwindling food sources, had been drawn to the area by the scent of his food. Black bears were typically shy around humans, but this one, driven by hunger, had been behaving unusually for weeks, scavenging closer to human trails and campsites. The bear watched Mark intently from the thick underbrush just beyond the stream. Its powerful body tensed. Mark stood to stretch, shouldering his pack as he prepared to continue his hike. At that moment, the bear decided to act. It emerged from the undergrowth with startling speed, its dark form blending almost seamlessly with the shadowy forest. Mark froze, instinctively raising his arms as the bear charged toward him. The attack happened so quickly that Mark barely had time to react. The bear collided with him, its massive weight knocking him off his feet and into the rocky edge of the stream. The impact stunned him, his head spinning as he struggled to process what was happening. The bear's claws tore through his jacket, raking across his arm and chest with terrifying ease. Mark screamed, his voice echoing through the empty woods. He thrashed against the bear, kicking and punching desperately to protect himself. His hiking pole lay out of reach and his knife was buried in his pack. The bear's jaws clamped down on his leg, the pain searing as its teeth sank into muscle and bone. Blood pooled around him, staining the clear water of the stream. Despite the agony, Mark fought back with everything he had. He grabbed a nearby rock, swinging it wildly at the bear's head. The first strike glanced off its thick skull, but the second landed more forcefully. The bear growled in anger, momentarily loosening its grip. Mark tried to crawl away, dragging his injured leg behind him, but the bear was relentless. It pounced again, pinning him to the ground with its powerful forelimbs. Mark flailed, his hands grabbing the bear's fur as he tried to push it away, but its strength was overwhelming. The bear's claws tore at his arms and chest, each swipe leaving deep, bloody gashes. He could feel his energy draining, his screams growing weaker as the attack continued. The forest seemed indifferent to the violence unfolding within it. The stream continued its gentle flow, the leaves rustled softly in the breeze, and the distant calls of birds carried on, oblivious to the carnage below. Mark's struggles grew fainter as his body gave in to the overwhelming force of the bear's attack. He collapsed onto the ground, his vision blurring, the sounds of the forest fading into a dull hum. When Mark lost consciousness, the bear finally relented. It pawed at his lifeless form briefly before retreating into the forest, disappearing as suddenly as it had appeared. The clearing by the stream was silent once more, save for the faint rustle of water and the occasional chirp of a bird. It was days before Mark's body was found. A group of hikers, noticing his absence from a nearby checkpoint, reported him missing, prompting a search effort by local authorities and rescue teams. When they discovered the scene by the stream, it was clear that Mark had been the bear attack victim. His body was severely mauled, his injuries consistent with a prolonged struggle. Wildlife experts who examined the area speculated that the bear had been driven to attack by hunger. The previous months had seen a significant decline in the availability of natural food sources in the region. Late frosts had diminished berry crops, and a lack of acorns, a staple food for black bears, had left many animals in the area malnourished and desperate. The tragedy sent shockwaves through the hiking community as a stark reminder of the unpredictability and dangers of venturing into the wilderness. While black bear attacks on humans are rare, they are not unheard of, especially when the animals are under extreme stress. In the aftermath, park officials worked to increase awareness about bear safety. New signage was installed along the Appalachian Trail, reminding hikers to carry bear spray, properly store their food, and remain vigilant in bear territory. December 1, 2024, a chilling event unfolded in a remote Siberian village. The local school, a place of learning and safety, was thrust into chaos when a massive grizzly bear wandered into the building during morning classes. The bear, most likely driven from its natural habitat by an unusually harsh winter, had been searching for food. It broke through a poorly secured window and stormed into the classrooms, creating panic among the students and teachers. At the time of the attack, the school was full of children eager for their lessons. Among the students were 15-year-olds Ivan Smirnov and Anna Volkov, two bright and active teenagers who had been looking forward to the day. Ivan was known for his love of science, always asking questions and exploring new ideas. Anna, on the other hand, was the quiet, artistic type, often sketching in her notebook. Neither of them knew that this day would be one they would never forget. As the bear entered, the entire school descended into chaos. The students screamed and scrambled for cover, trying to hide under desks or behind cabinets. Teachers, who had been trying to maintain order, were now forced to act quickly to protect their students. Among them was Olga Petrovna, a 42-year-old teacher who had been with the school for over a decade. Olga had always been a calm and caring figure, known for her gentle nature and unwavering commitment to her students. She was also a mother figure to many, someone who would do anything to protect her pupils. When the bear charged into the classroom, Olga rushed to the front to shield the students, but the bear was relentless. As the attack continued, the bear mauled several students, including Ivan and Anna, who were caught in its path while trying to flee. The air was thick with panic and confusion as the bear's growls and the screams of the students filled the hallways. The teachers did their best to lock doors and barricade themselves, but the bear was too powerful and determined. Ivan and Anna, along with other students, were left trapped, unable to escape the danger. During the commotion, Olga tried to fend off the bear, but the odds were against her. She managed to push some students towards safety before the bear turned on her. She fought with every ounce of strength she had, but the bear was too much to handle. In a matter of moments, the attack had claimed its toll, and the bear finally retreated, leaving behind devastation. By the time help arrived, it was clear that the damage had been done. The students, many of them terrified and injured, had to be rushed to safety. Emergency responders and a local hunter who had heard the distress call were able to track down the bear. It was shot and killed to prevent any further harm. However, the damage had already been done. Ivan and Anna, along with several other students, had been mauled. Ivan suffered severe injuries to his limbs and torso, while Anna was badly injured and required immediate medical attention. The entire village was shaken by the attack. This small, remote community, which had always been quiet and peaceful, was now scarred by the trauma of this horrific event. The villagers were left to process the loss and the fear that such a creature could strike so close to their homes. The attack also sparked an urgent national conversation about safety measures in schools, especially those located in bear territories. By morning, the village was still in shock. The attack had left a deep scar on the community, but the consequences were far from over. While the students who survived the bear's assault were shaken, their physical injuries were the least of their struggles. The emotional and psychological toll on everyone involved was immeasurable. Ivan and Anna, still recovering from their wounds, faced a long road to healing, both physically and mentally. Ivan had been hit badly by the bear, his arms and legs marked by deep gashes and bruises. Though he had survived, the trauma from the attack would remain with him for years to come. His parents, who had rushed to the hospital the moment they heard the news, could barely contain their grief. They had feared the worst, and while Ivan's recovery was slow, they were grateful that he was still alive. However, The emotional scars would last much longer. The once energetic, curious boy had become quiet and withdrawn, no longer eager to embrace the world as he once had. Anna, too, had been badly injured in the attack. The bear's powerful claws had torn into her skin, leaving her with deep lacerations on her arms and back. Her recovery, like Ivan's, was slow, and she found herself waking up at night, unable to shake the fear that she would be trapped again. The physical pain she endured was accompanied by a growing sense of isolation. Her friends, though supportive, could never truly understand the depth of the trauma she faced. Olga, the teacher who had bravely tried to protect her students, had not been as lucky. She was among those who had suffered the most in the attack. After the bear retreated, she was found badly injured but managed to hold on. Sadly, Olga passed away before she could be airlifted to the hospital. She had been a pillar of the school and the village, and her loss was felt deeply by everyone who knew her. The teachers who had worked alongside her, the students she had guided, and the parents who trusted her with their children all mourned her passing. For the rest of the village, the aftermath was just as painful. The local authorities immediately began to review the safety measures in schools, particularly in areas where wildlife such as bears roamed. The discussion about how to make the village safer while still allowing children to enjoy the wilderness was intense. New measures were put in place, such as building higher fences around the school and installing better windows to prevent future invasions. The village also discussed the importance of educating residents, especially children, about bear safety and what to do if they encountered one in the wild. The hunter who had helped track down the bear was also praised for his quick thinking, but his actions served as a reminder of the terrifying reality of living in such close proximity to wild animals. The grizzly bear, after being shot, was found to be in poor health. Experts speculated that it had been driven from its natural habitat by hunger and had come closer to the village in search of food. This realization added another layer of grief, as it became clear that the bear's actions were not merely a random attack, but a desperate act of survival. The community was forever changed by this incident. While life slowly began to return to normal, the scars, both physical and emotional, remained. The students who survived, the teachers who were involved, and the entire village carried the weight of the tragedy. The attack on that Christmas Eve served as a grim reminder of nature's raw power and the fragile balance between humans and the Siberian wilderness in January is a place of profound stillness where the frozen expanse stretches endlessly, interrupted only by patches of dense forest and the occasional rugged outcrop. The snow-covered terrain, glittering under a pale sun, hides a dangerous secret. It is home to the Russian grizzly bear, a creature as majestic as it is deadly. On January 9, 2025, a team of 7 wildlife officers experienced in managing these powerful animals ventured into this forbidding landscape on a routine relocation mission. What unfolded that day would forever change the way such operations were conducted. The group, led by Ivan Tikhonov, a seasoned officer with over a decade of experience in wildlife management, included Viktor Gorsky, a tranquilizer specialist, Alexei Petrov, a logistics coordinator, Dmitry Sorokin, a veterinarian, Yuri Karpov, a tracker, Pavel Mikhailov, a driver, and Andrei Volkov, the youngest of the team, eager to prove himself. Their task was straightforward yet dangerous: relocate a Russian grizzly bear that had wandered too close to human settlements. The bear had recently been spotted near the outskirts of a small Siberian village, scavenging for food, its natural habitat likely disturbed by illegal logging. The officers traveled in 2 sturdy vehicles, equipped with tranquilizer guns, safety equipment, and a reinforced cage for transporting the bear. They arrived at the forest's edge in the early morning, the air biting and heavy with the promise of snow. The officers parked their vehicles safely from the bear's den, relying on Yuri's tracking skills to lead them to the site. The plan was to tranquilize the bear, secure it in the transport cage, and release it in a remote area far from human activity. The den was nestled in a thicket of trees, partially hidden by snow and undergrowth. The officers moved cautiously, their breaths visible in the frigid air, their boots crunching softly against the snow. Ivan instructed the team to spread out, positioning themselves strategically to block the bear's escape routes. The atmosphere was tense but focused. They had done this many times before. As the group prepared their equipment, Pavel, distracted by a crackling message on the radio, accidentally left the driver's door of one vehicle ajar. It was a small oversight, but one with catastrophic consequences. Unbeknownst to the team, the bear, already on edge from the commotion near its den, had been watching them. drawn by the scent of food left in the vehicle, it emerged suddenly from the thicket, a massive, hulking figure against the snowy backdrop. The first officer to notice the bear was Victor, who warned the others. The bear, agitated and aggressive, charged directly toward the open vehicle. The team scrambled to deploy their tranquilizers, but the situation rapidly descended into chaos. The bear's sheer speed and ferocity caught them off guard. Before anyone could react, it reached the vehicle, its powerful claws ripping through the seats as it searched for the source of the scent. Pavel, attempting to retrieve the tranquilizer gun from the back of the vehicle, became the bear's first target. The animal lunged at him, its massive jaws clamping down on his shoulder, dragging him to the ground. The team, horrified but determined, tried to intervene. Ivan and Victor fired tranquilizer darts, but the thick fur and adrenaline-fueled rage of the bear rendered the initial doses ineffective. Alexei and Dmitri rushed to assist Pavel, but the bear swiped at them with terrifying force, its claws tearing through their protective clothing. The clearing erupted into a frenzy of shouts and growls. The snow stained crimson as the bear turned its attention to the remaining officers. Yuri and Andrei, positioned farther from the vehicle, attempted to flank the animal, hoping to draw it away from their fallen comrades. Andrei, armed with a tranquilizer gun, managed to land a shot on the bear's flank, but it only seemed to enrage the creature further. The bear charged at him, knocking him to the ground before Yuri could react. Seeing his team overwhelmed, Ivan shouted orders to regroup, but the bear's ferocity left little room for coordination. One by one, the officers fell, their attempts to subdue the animal futile against its raw power. The bear, its primal instincts fully awakened, delivered swift and devastating blows, leaving no chance for survival. The attack lasted mere minutes but felt like an eternity. When the bear finally retreated into the dense forest, the clearing was silent, save for the wind and the soft patter of falling snow. The 7 officers' bodies lay scattered, their equipment broken, and their mission tragically unfinished. A search team discovered the scene hours later, sending shockwaves through Russia's wildlife management community. The scale of the tragedy was unprecedented, raising urgent questions about the safety protocols for handling dangerous predators in remote regions. Investigators determined that the bear's heightened aggression was likely due to its disrupted habitat and the stress of human intrusion near its den. The open vehicle door and the scent of food only exacerbated the situation, creating a perfect storm of circumstances that led to the attack. The loss of Ivan, Victor, Alexei, Dmitri, Yuri, Pavel, and Andrei devastated their families, colleagues, and the broader conservation community. Vigils were held in their honor, and their names became a solemn reminder of the risks faced by those who work to protect and manage wildlife. The incident spurred significant changes in safety protocols, including mandatory double checks of all vehicles and equipment, increased use of remote tranquilizer delivery systems, and enhanced training for officers on handling high-stress encounters with predators. In the aftermath, the bear was not pursued. Wildlife experts argued that the attack was not the result of malice, but rather a tragic intersection of human error and instinct. The forest, as unforgiving as it is beautiful, had simply reminded humanity of its place in the natural order. Though tragic, the deaths of the 7 officers led to greater awareness and improvements in how dangerous predators were managed, ensuring that their sacrifice was not in vain. In early September 2020, the rugged wilderness of Montana was alive with the crisp energy of the coming autumn. The towering pines and rolling hills glowed golden under the rising sun's light, their sharp edges softened by the morning mist. It was the beginning of hunting season, and the remote backcountry echoed with the faint sounds of hunters quietly moving through the landscape. Among them was Ryan Carter, a seasoned outdoorsman in his mid-30s who had been hunting these lands since his teenage years. Equipped with a high-powered rifle, a sturdy pack, and years of experience, Ryan set out on a solo trek to scout for elk. Montana's backcountry was familiar to Ryan, a towering tree sanctuary, narrow valleys, and rocky ridges. He deeply respected and understood this world, but even the most seasoned hunter could be blindsided by its unforgiving nature. The hunt required patience, sharp senses, and an understanding of the delicate balance between predator and prey. For Ryan, it was not just about the trophy, but the challenge, the connection to the wild, and the thrill of tracking a creature through its natural habitat. That morning, Ryan moved with practiced silence, his boots crunching softly on the carpet of fallen leaves. He had been following faint tracks along a game trail, each print a tantalizing sign of a nearby elk. The distant bugle of a bull elk had echoed earlier, and Ryan had been steadily closing in. As he reached the ridge crest, he paused, scanning the valley below with binoculars. A shallow stream meandered through the landscape, its banks lined with dense foliage. It was here, near the glistening water, that he spotted movement. At first, Ryan thought it was the elk he'd been tracking, but as he adjusted his binoculars, he realized he had stumbled upon a mother grizzly bear and her two cubs. The trio was feeding along the stream bank, the cubs playfully swiping at the water, while the mother dug into the soft earth for roots and insects. Ryan froze, his heart racing, not with fear, but with awe. Grizzlies were rare, even in Montana's wildest regions, and seeing a mother and her cubs was a once-in-a-lifetime encounter. Ryan knew the dangers of such a situation. Mother bears were notoriously protective of their young, and any perceived threat could provoke an aggressive response. Despite this, a part of him was drawn closer, captivated by the scene unfolding below. The bear's massive frame moved with power and grace, its thick fur rippling under the morning light. Ryan adjusted his position, moving cautiously downhill to get a better view, unaware that his decision to close the distance was pushing him into dangerous territory. As he crept forward, the mother bear's head suddenly snapped up. Her dark eyes locked onto Ryan, her body tensing as she sniffed the air. Ryan stopped dead in his tracks, realizing too late that he had crossed an invisible boundary. Sensing their mother's unease, the cubs darted closer to her, their playful energy replaced by instinctive fear. A low growl rumbled from the bear's chest, a deep and guttural warning that cut through the stillness of the valley. Ryan instinctively raised his rifle, his pulse pounding in his ears. But before he could make a decision, the bear charged. Covering the distance between them in seconds, the grizzly closed the gap with terrifying speed, its massive body barreling through the undergrowth. Ryan barely had time to react before the bear collided with him, the impact knocking him to the ground and sending his rifle skidding out of reach. The bear's claws raked across Ryan's chest, shredding his jacket and tearing into his flesh with brutal force. Pain exploded through his body as he tried to shield himself with his arms, but the bear's relentless assault was overwhelming. Its jaws clamped down on his shoulder, and with a powerful shake, it dragged him deeper into the woods. Ryan screamed, his cries of agony echoing through the trees, but there was no one nearby to hear. Pinned beneath the grizzly's immense weight, Ryan fought desperately to survive. He struck at the bear's face with his fists, his knife buried uselessly in his pack. But his blows were no match for the predator's raw power. The bear swiped at his face, leaving deep gashes that obscured his vision with blood. Every movement, every attempt to resist, only seemed to provoke the animal further. Its claws and teeth tore into him with unrelenting ferocity, reducing his body to a broken, bloodied mass. After what felt like an eternity, the bear suddenly stopped. Its ears twitched, picking up on a distant sound that Ryan couldn't hear through the haze of his fading consciousness. The bear released him, stepping back momentarily before retreating into the forest with its cubs in tow. Whether it was satisfied or simply responding to another instinct, it left Ryan where he lay, motionless and barely alive. Hours later, a group of fellow hunters, alerted by the distant echo of Ryan's screams, found his body near the stream. The scene was harrowing. Blood soaked the ground, staining the fallen leaves a deep crimson. Ryan's body was barely recognizable, his injuries a testament to the sheer brutality of the attack. The hunters quickly alerted authorities, shaken by the discovery, who arrived to recover the remains and investigate the incident. The attack's aftermath sent shockwaves through the local hunting community and beyond. Experts reviewing the case determined that Ryan's proximity to the cubs had triggered the mother bear's defensive instincts, a tragic mistake that cost him his life. The bear, they concluded, was acting out of a natural drive to protect its young, not malice. Despite this, the incident reignited debates about human encroachment into wildlife habitats and the inherent risks of venturing into the wilderness. Ryan's death was a somber reminder of the unforgiving nature of the wild. His story served as a cautionary tale for hunters and outdoor enthusiasts, highlighting the importance of respecting the boundaries between humans and wildlife. For those who knew him, Ryan's passion for the outdoors and his respect for the land were enduring aspects of his legacy. Yet his final encounter underscored a harsh truth. No amount of experience or preparation could fully insulate one from the dangers of nature. In the following weeks, local authorities and wildlife organizations launched campaigns to educate hunters about bear behavior and safety. Signs warning of bear activity were placed along popular trails, and regulations were updated to require hunters to carry bear spray, in addition to firearms. However, for those who ventured into the Montana backcountry, Ryan Carter's story remained a stark reminder of the risks of stepping into the domain of one of nature's most formidable predators. July 15, 2022, Nathan Price, a 39-year-old experienced hiker from Alberta, Canada, decided to take a solo hike through the Yukon Territory. Nathan had always been passionate about nature and hiking, and his years of experience made him comfortable in the wilderness. He had spent many years exploring remote locations across Canada, and the Yukon, with its vast, untouched landscapes, was a place he had been eager to explore. Nathan had planned the hike to take a few days, and he was looking forward to the solitude it would bring. The wilderness in the Yukon is known for being quiet and isolated, and Nathan cherished the peaceful moments in nature. He was well prepared for the hike, bringing along all the essentials, including food, water, and a first aid kit. He had even packed bear spray as a precaution, knowing that the region was home to grizzly bears. The day had started like any other, with Nathan trekking through dense forests and rugged terrain. The sun was shining, and the cool breeze made the long walk enjoyable. Nathan relished the challenge of navigating the uneven trails, often stopping to take in the stunning views of the surrounding mountains and valleys. As he trekked deeper into the forest, he became more aware of the wildlife that lived in the area. Nathan had seen a few birds and smaller animals, but he had yet to encounter any large predators. As he walked along a narrow trail that led through thick brush, Nathan accidentally crossed paths with a mother grizzly bear and her cubs. The bear had been foraging nearby, and the sudden presence of Nathan startled her. Sensing a threat to her cubs, the mother bear immediately went into protective mode and charged at Nathan without hesitation. He froze for a moment, unsure of what to do, but the bear was too fast. Before he could react, she knocked him to the ground with tremendous force. Nathan struggled to get back up, but the bear was already on him, using her powerful paws and sharp claws to maul him. He could feel the pain as her claws tore into his body. Nathan's mind raced as he tried to think of a way to survive. He remembered reading about survival tactics for bear encounters, particularly the idea of playing dead to avoid further aggression. As painful as it was, Nathan knew he had to do whatever it took to survive. Lying there, feeling the bear's claws digging into him, Nathan closed his eyes and tried to remain as still as possible. He knew that if he moved or fought back, the bear might intensify the attack. The bear continued to maul him, but Nathan forced himself to stay calm and play dead, hoping that she would eventually lose interest. After what felt like an eternity, the bear stopped its attack and, sensing that Nathan was no longer a threat, turned and retreated back into the forest. Nathan lay there, his body badly injured, but he had survived the terrifying encounter. He remained still for a moment, feeling the heavy weight of exhaustion and pain. His body was bruised, scratched, and badly wounded from the grizzly's attack. Despite the intense pain in his legs and arms, he could still think clearly. The bear had retreated, but he knew he wasn't out of danger yet. The injuries he sustained were severe, and he was far from help in the wild Yukon. His mind raced with thoughts of how to survive. He knew he had to move quickly to find safety or get help. The pain in his legs and arms was overwhelming, but Nathan forced himself to move. His survival instincts kicked in, and he slowly began dragging his body across the forest floor. Every movement sent waves of pain through his battered body, but he knew he couldn't stay where he was. He needed to find help before he lost consciousness or bled out. Nathan struggled to sit up and then crawl toward the trailhead where he hoped someone might find him. The thought of being discovered by another hiker kept him going. His vision blurred with each movement, and the blood loss from his injuries made his head spin. His legs, which had been mauled by the bear, were barely functioning, but he pushed forward. He needed to stay alive long enough to be rescued. After what felt like hours, Nathan managed to reach the trailhead. By this time, his body was covered in sweat, dirt, and blood. He had managed to stop most of the bleeding, but he was still losing blood fast. His breathing was shallow, and he was starting to feel dizzy. Just when he thought he couldn't move any farther, he saw a figure in the distance. Someone was approaching on the trail. It was a hiker who had noticed him and was rushing to his aid. The hiker quickly assessed Nathan's condition, recognizing the severity of his injuries. Nathan, barely conscious, was too weak to speak, but the hiker knew he had to get help immediately. He stayed with Nathan, keeping him awake and as calm as possible. The hiker called emergency services, explaining the situation. Nathan's injuries were so severe that an airlift would be needed to get him to the hospital. Within a short time, the rescue team arrived, bringing the necessary medical equipment to help Nathan. The helicopter landed, and Nathan was carefully placed on a stretcher. He was airlifted out of the Yukon wilderness, his body weakened and his injuries grave, but still alive. At the hospital, Nathan underwent several surgeries to repair the damage done by the bear. The doctors worked hard to save him, and after a long recovery process, he was able to return home. However, the scars from the attack, both physical and emotional, would stay with him forever. The incident changed his perspective on the wilderness and survival. He would never forget the terror he felt as the bear charged at him, nor the bravery he discovered within himself to survive. Nathan's survival story became an inspiration for others, raising awareness about bear attacks in remote regions and the importance of survival tactics for hikers. He knew that he was lucky to be alive, and that the experience had taught him valuable lessons about respecting wildlife and the dangers of hiking in bear territory. The early summer morning of June 18, 2015, dawned clear and cool in the rugged wilderness of Wyoming. Kevin Harris, a 32-year-old outdoor enthusiast, had set out for a solo ride on one of the state's most popular off-road trails. Known as Teton's Crest, the trail snaked through dense forests, rocky outcrops, and steep descents, offering challenge and exhilaration to mountain bikers. Kevin was no stranger to the wild. He had ridden these trails many times before, confident in his skills and familiarity with the terrain. But the wilderness, unpredictable and indifferent, had its plans that day. Kevin pedaled hard as the trail wound through groves of pine and aspen trees. The forest was alive with the sounds of nature, birds chirping, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, and the occasional snap of a branch underfoot. He relished the solitude, the rhythmic hum of his tires on the dirt path, and the adrenaline from navigating sharp turns and steep drops. Teton's Crest was notorious for its technical sections, but it was also beloved for its isolation, cutting deep through bear country. Riders were warned to carry bear spray and make noise on the trails, but Kevin had opted to travel light, eager for speed. As he rounded a bend, the trail began a sharp descent, narrow and hemmed in by thick underbrush. Kevin leaned forward, his tires kicking up dirt and small stones, the wind rushing past his face. He felt the familiar thrill of control balanced on the edge of chaos. But as he hurtled downhill, the dense forest ahead seemed to shift unnaturally, and he saw a massive figure moving through the undergrowth. Before he could react, a grizzly bear emerged onto the trail, no more than 20 feet ahead. It was enormous, its shaggy brown fur bristling as it turned to face him. The bear's dark eyes locked onto Kevin, and it rose slightly on its hind legs. Its presence was unmistakably dominant and territorial. Time seemed to slow as Kevin registered the situation. He had accidentally crossed paths with one of nature's most formidable predators, and there was no time to stop. The bear dropped to all fours and charged. Kevin's instincts took over. He leaned into his handlebars and pedaled furiously, pushing his bike to its limits as he tried to outpace the bear. The grizzly, however, was faster than he had imagined. Its powerful strides sent dirt and debris flying as it closed the distance. The ground trembled under the weight of the animal's pursuit, and Kevin could hear its labored breaths and guttural growls growing louder behind him. The narrow path, littered with roots and loose rocks, left little room for error. Kevin swerved around a jagged boulder, his heart pounding as the bear's shadow loomed behind him. Desperation fueled his speed, but the uneven terrain conspired against him. His front tire struck a hidden root as he rounded another sharp turn, sending him careening off balance. Instantly, Kevin collided with a tree, the impact of which was throwing him off his bike and onto the forest floor. Dazed and disoriented, Kevin barely had time to register the pain in his shoulder and side before the bear was upon him. It roared, swiping at him with claws like hooked knives, tearing through the sleeve of his jersey and raking deep gashes into his arm. Kevin scrambled backward, his hands searching for anything to defend himself. His fingers found the frame of his bike, and he seized it, using it as a makeshift shield. The bear lunged again, claws clanging against the metal frame as Kevin pressed it between them. Frustrated by the obstruction, the Grizzly swiped at the bike with enough force to bend the front wheel. Kevin used the momentary distraction to crawl backward, his injured arm throbbing as he struggled to put distance between himself and the animal. The bear charged again, its jaws snapping shut just inches from his leg. With adrenaline, Kevin swung the bike frame at the bear, the movement awkward but desperate. The impact startled the bear, and it hesitated, growling low as it eyed him. Seizing the opportunity, Kevin dragged himself to his feet, clutching the bike frame like a lifeline. His injured arm hung uselessly at his side, blood dripping onto the forest floor. The bear huffed, its ears twitching as it seemed to weigh the effort of continuing the attack. Finally, with a final growl, the animal turned and retreated into the underbrush, leaving Kevin alone in the aftermath. Kevin stood trembling, his breaths ragged as the forest fell eerily silent around him. His legs felt like lead, but he forced himself to move, knowing he needed to find help. With his bike damaged beyond use, he abandoned it and began the grueling journey on foot. Every step sent waves of pain through his body, but he pressed on, driven by the primal need to survive. Hours later, Kevin stumbled onto a nearby trailhead, his vision blurred and his strength fading. A group of hikers found him collapsed on the ground, bloodied and barely conscious. They called for help, and Kevin was airlifted to the nearest hospital, where he underwent surgery to repair the deep lacerations on his arm and shoulder. Doctors marveled at his resilience, noting that his quick thinking and use of the bike frame had likely saved his life. The attack left Kevin with physical scars that would never fully fade, but the emotional toll was just as significant. He struggled with nightmares and a heightened sense of vulnerability in the months that followed. However, Kevin refused to let the experience define him solely as a victim. Instead, he advocated for trail safety, sharing his story to raise awareness about biking risks in bear country. Through public talks and collaborations with local organizations, Kevin pushed for more bear-friendly trail designs, including better signage, the installation of bear-proof food storage, and education campaigns about wildlife encounters. His efforts sparked meaningful changes, with new measures implemented across popular trails in Wyoming to reduce the likelihood of similar incidents. Looking back on that fateful day, Kevin often reflected on the delicate balance between humans and nature. The wilderness, he realized, was neither cruel nor kind. It simply was. His encounter with the grizzly had been a stark reminder of the power and unpredictability of the natural world, and it left him with a profound respect for the creatures that called it home. The evening sun cast a golden glow over the jagged peaks of the Grand Teton Range as 5 friends, Lindsay, Tom, Rachel, Jack, and Mike, set up camp near a secluded trailhead. The group, all in their mid-20s, had planned this camping trip for months, eager to escape the bustle of daily life and immerse themselves in the raw beauty of the wilderness. The spot they chose offered spectacular views, surrounded by dense pines and wildflower meadows, with a nearby stream providing a soothing soundtrack to their evening. The campsite, however, was not without risk. Signs were posted along the trailhead warning of heightened bear activity in the area. Several incidents of grizzlies rummaging through campsites have been reported recently, prompting the park rangers to urge visitors to follow strict food storage protocols. But the friends, more concerned with enjoying their adventure, paid little heed to the warnings. They dismissed the danger as exaggerated and failed to secure their food properly, leaving it stored in coolers outside their tents instead of bear-proof containers. The group sat around a roaring fire as twilight deepened, laughing and sharing stories. The smell of grilled meat and marshmallows lingered in the air, drifting into the surrounding forest. Unbeknownst to them, the aroma carried far beyond the campsite, catching the attention of a wandering grizzly bear. The bear, a massive male weighing close to 700 pounds, had been foraging in the area, its instincts sharpened by hunger as it sought sustenance in the summer months leading up to hibernation. By the time the group retreated to their tents for the night, the fire had burnt down to embers, leaving the campsite quiet under a sky full of stars. The coolers remained outside, their lids unsecured, and the faint smell of food still hung in the air. The forest around them was silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. Exhausted from the day's hike, the friends quickly fell asleep, unaware of the danger that lurked nearby. The bear approached the campsite cautiously, its keen nose leading it directly to the source of the enticing smells. It sniffed at the coolers, pawing at them until they opened, spilling their contents onto the ground. Emboldened by the easy meal, the bear turned its attention to the tents. Its powerful sense of smell told it that more potential food lay beyond the thin fabric walls. The beast growled low in its throat, a sound that went unheard by the sleeping campers. Without warning, the bear began to claw at the nearest tent. Jack, who had chosen to set up his tent closest to the forest edge, was jolted awake by the noise. He barely had time to react before the bear's claws tore through the fabric, grabbing hold of him. It dragged him out with horrifying strength, its jaws clamping down on his shoulder. Jack's screams pierced the night, waking the others in a frenzy of confusion and terror. Tom scrambled into the tent closest to Jack's and grabbed a nearby flashlight. The beam illuminated the horrific scene. The bear standing over Jack's body, its fur matted with blood, its eyes glinting with a mix of instinct and aggression. Driven by adrenaline, Tom grabbed a branch and ran toward the bear, swinging with all his might. But the bear was undeterred. With a single swipe of its massive paw, it sent Tom sprawling to the ground, his arm breaking with a sickening crack. Rachel and Mike, paralyzed with fear, hesitated for a moment before deciding to run. They bolted toward the trailhead, hoping to find help or scare the bear away. Lindsay, trapped in her tent, tried to remain as quiet as possible, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she prayed the bear wouldn't notice her. But the bear was relentless. After incapacitating Tom, it turned its attention to Lindsay's tent and easily tore through the fabric. Lindsay's terrified cries joined the cacophony of chaos as the bear attacked. Her attempts to fight back were futile against the predator's sheer power. Meanwhile, Rachel and Mike sprinted through the darkness, their flashlights cutting through the dense trees. The trail seemed endless, every shadow a potential threat, every rustle of leaves echoing the nightmare they had just escaped. Their lungs burnt, and their legs ached, but they didn't dare stop until they reached a ranger station nearly a mile away. Gasping for breath, they relayed the horror unfolding at their campsite to the stunned park rangers. When rangers arrived at the scene, the first light of dawn was breaking over the mountains. The campsite was a scene of devastation. Jack and Lindsay were dead, their bodies bearing the unmistakable marks of a grizzly attack. Tom, barely conscious, lay near the fire pit, his broken arm twisted unnaturally. The bear was gone, retreating into the forest after its brutal rampage. The aftermath of the attack left a deep scar on the surviving friends in the park community. Jack and Lindsay's families were devastated, struggling to comprehend the loss of their loved ones. Tom faced a long road to recovery, both physically and emotionally, haunted by the memory of the bear's savage power. The incident sparked widespread debate about human responsibility in bear territory. Wildlife experts emphasized that the tragedy could have been avoided if the group had followed proper safety protocols. The unsecured food and careless campsite setup had created an irresistible lure for the bear, leading to a deadly encounter that might otherwise have been prevented. In the following weeks, the national park officials intensified their efforts to educate visitors about bear safety. They installed more prominent warning signs, increased patrols, and distributed bear-proof containers to all campers. They also introduced mandatory bear safety orientations, ensuring no visitor could claim ignorance of the risks. For Rachel and Mike, the memory of that night would never fade. They carried the weight of survivors' guilt, replaying the decisions that had led to the tragedy. Once a place of beauty and adventure, the wilderness had become a haunting reminder of the delicate balance between humans and nature. On a routine patrol in a park in Wyoming, on April 23, 2023, Park Ranger Sarah Larkin, 37, was monitoring a popular visitor trail that saw many tourists every day. The park, located in Wyoming, is one of the most visited national parks in the United States, known for its geothermal wonders and diverse wildlife. Sarah was familiar with the park's many trails, always mindful of the wildlife that inhabited the area. She had been working as a ranger for 12 years and had encountered her fair share of dangerous situations. However, nothing could have prepared her for what would happen that afternoon. Sarah had been monitoring the area around the visitor trail, ensuring that everything was running smoothly. The trail was well-traveled, and sightings of animals were not uncommon. On that particular day, Sarah noticed a grizzly bear in the distance. The bear had been scavenging carcasses in the area, and its behavior was unusually aggressive. Trained to recognize the signs of a bear that was getting too close, Sarah immediately decided to take precautionary measures. As she moved closer to the bear, Sarah tried to distance herself while keeping an eye on the animal. The bear, however, became agitated and charged at her without warning. Sarah's heart raced as she realized the immediate danger she was in. She reached for her bear spray, knowing it was her best option for defense. But in the chaos, the bear spray malfunctioned, and Sarah's attempt to stop the bear was unsuccessful. In a split second, the grizzly slammed into Sarah with overwhelming force, knocking her to the ground. The bear's massive claws tore through the air as Sarah tried to scramble away. She knew she had no time to lose. The bear was now right on top of her, its heavy body pushing her further into the dirt. The park ranger's mind raced as she thought about how to protect herself. Her heart pounded as the bear began to maul her, biting into her leg and arm. The pain was unbearable, and every second felt like an eternity as the grizzly continued its relentless attack. Despite the intense pain, Sarah knew she had to call for help. She had been trained to stay calm in these situations. Using her radio, she sent out a distress call to the ranger station, giving her location as quickly as she could. The pain in her leg and arm made it difficult to concentrate, but she managed to get the message out. Fellow rangers heard her distress call and sprang into action, rushing to her location. The bear, still agitated, continued its attack, and Sarah struggled to defend herself. Out of options, she knew she had to hold on until help arrived. The seconds dragged on as she fought to stay conscious. Her body was covered in blood from the bear's attack, but Sarah clung to the hope that help would arrive soon. As Sarah lay on the ground, her body weak from blood loss, she could hear the distant sounds of help arriving. After what felt like hours of torment, the bear finally retreated, leaving Sarah severely injured but alive. Her breathing was shallow, and every movement sent waves of pain through her body. But she remained alert, hoping her fellow rangers would reach her in time. The bear's departure allowed Sarah a brief moment of respite, but she knew she had to stay conscious and focused if she was going to survive. Her mind raced as she recalled her training. She understood that she couldn't afford to let her injuries worsen and that she needed to keep pressure on her wounds to stop the bleeding. Despite her efforts, she could feel herself growing weaker as the minutes passed. Her heart was still pounding, but her limbs felt heavy, and her vision began to blur. In what seemed like no time at all, Sarah heard the sound of footsteps approaching. The rangers had arrived. They quickly assessed the situation and immediately began providing aid. They checked her vitals and worked swiftly to stabilize her. The bear attack had left her with deep gashes in her leg and arm, but the worst injury was the trauma to her chest. The blood loss was significant, and the rangers knew they had to act fast to save her life. As the rangers applied a tourniquet to her leg, they called for a helicopter to airlift Sarah to the nearest hospital. She felt herself being carefully lifted onto a stretcher, and the pain in her body intensified as the movement disturbed her wounds. Despite the agony, Sarah remained conscious long enough to feel a sense of relief, knowing that she was going to get the help she so desperately needed. Within minutes, the helicopter arrived. The rangers transferred Sarah onto the aircraft, and it lifted off, taking her to safety. The flight was rough, and every bump in the air seemed to send a jolt of pain through her body. Yet, she held on to the hope that she would survive. She thought of her family, her colleagues, and her love for the wilderness. It was a painful and traumatic experience, but she knew she had done everything she could to protect herself in the face of danger. Upon reaching the hospital, Sarah was immediately rushed into surgery. The doctors worked tirelessly to treat her wounds, repairing the damage to her leg and arm. She was lucky to be alive, but the physical and emotional scars from the attack would stay with her for the rest of her life. The incident had left her unable to return to her work as a park ranger, and the memories of the bear's attack haunted her daily. She had been trained to face dangerous situations, but this one had pushed her to her limits. In the months that followed, Sarah underwent multiple surgeries to repair her injuries. Despite her physical recovery, the emotional toll was harder to heal. She would never forget the moments when the bear attacked and the sheer terror she felt as it mauled her. Returning to Park, a place she had once loved and considered home, became increasingly difficult. The attack had changed her, but it also gave her a newfound respect for the wild animals she had spent her career protecting. Sarah's story spread quickly, and her survival became a symbol of the risks faced by park rangers and others working in wildlife areas. The incident sparked a national conversation about safety protocols and the increasing presence of bears in high-traffic national parks. In response to the attack, new safety measures were implemented, including updated bear awareness training for park staff, improved equipment, and more stringent rules for visitors to maintain a safe distance from wild. The morning air along Bear Creek in Colorado was crisp and invigorating, carrying the earthy scent of pine trees and damp soil. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting a golden light over the rugged terrain that bordered the winding creek. Park Ranger Claire Thompson, 29, had been assigned to this stretch of wilderness for the past 3 years and intimately knew its paths, wildlife, and rhythms. Despite the challenges of patrolling such a vast area, Claire loved her work. She found solace in the quiet beauty of nature, a stark contrast to the chaos of the urban world she had left behind. Bear Creek, nestled within a national forest near Dolores, Colorado, was a haven for wildlife. Elk grazed in open meadows, foxes darted through underbrush, and black bears roamed the forested slopes. However, one particular bear had been sighted closer to human activity recently. Reports trickled in of a large black bear foraging near campsites and picnic areas, drawn by the smell of food left behind by careless visitors. Though the bear hadn't displayed overtly aggressive behavior, its increasing proximity to people had become a concern. Claire was tasked with monitoring the situation during her routine patrol. That morning, Claire was equipped with her standard gear, a radio, a first aid kit, and bear spray holstered to her side. Her route followed the creek's winding course, where she stopped periodically to check for signs of wildlife activity. Tracks, scat, and claw marks on tree trunks told her the bear had been nearby recently, but she saw no immediate danger. Her footsteps crunched softly on the gravel path as she moved deeper into the forest, the tranquility of the environment wrapping around her like a warm blanket. About an hour into her patrol, Claire noticed a movement up ahead. Through a gap in the trees, she spotted the black bear lumbering along the creek's edge, its powerful frame silhouetted against the dappled sunlight. It was larger than she had anticipated, its glossy coat rippling with each step. The bear appeared calm, sniffing at the ground and occasionally pawing at rocks for food. Claire paused, her breath catching at the sight of the majestic creature. It was a rare opportunity to observe such a magnificent animal up close. Claire's training had emphasized maintaining a safe distance from wildlife, but in the moment, her instincts faltered. The bear didn't seem agitated or aware of her presence. She reached for her camera, a habit born of her love for photography and documenting her experiences in the field. She moved slowly, angling for a better shot, creeping closer as the bear continued foraging. The thrill of the moment clouded her judgment, and she failed to notice subtle signs in the bear's behavior. Its ears twitching, its head lifting, and its body tensing as it became aware of her presence. Suddenly, the bear turned. Its dark eyes locked onto Claire, and the air thickened with tension. She froze, her heart pounding as she realized her mistake. The bear huffed, a deep, guttural sound that echoed through the forest. In an instant, the animal charged. The bear's speed was staggering, and its powerful legs propelled it forward with terrifying force. Claire barely had time to react. She stumbled backward, reaching for her bear spray, but the bear was too quick. It collided with her, and its massive weight knocked her to the ground. The impact sent her head crashing against a rock, and darkness consumed her vision as she lost consciousness. Another park ranger, Ian Fuller, was conducting patrol along a separate trail nearby when he heard the commotion. The sounds of snapping branches and guttural roars cut through the forest's stillness, followed by a sharp, desperate cry that sent chills down his spine. Ian sprinted toward the source of the noise, his boots pounding against the uneven ground. When he arrived, the scene before him was harrowing. The bear stood over Claire's motionless body, its claws raking at the ground and its breath coming in heavy bursts. Ian's mind raced as he weighed his options. He knew firing a weapon at the bear would be a last resort, potentially escalating the situation. Instead, he raised his rifle and fired a warning shot into the air. The sharp crack of the gunshot reverberated through the forest, startling the bear. It paused, its ears flicking as it assessed the new threat. Ian shouted and waved his arms, making himself appear larger to intimidate the animal. The bear huffed again, its breath visible in the cool air, before turning and retreating into the dense underbrush. The forest fell silent once more, except for Ian's ragged breathing. Ian rushed to Claire's side, his stomach twisting at the sight of her injuries. Blood seeped from a deep wound on her forehead, and her uniform was torn where the bear's claws had raked across her torso. She was still alive, her breath shallow and labored. Ian radioed for emergency assistance, his voice trembling as he relayed their location. Paramedics arrived within the hour, navigating the rugged terrain with difficulty. Claire was carefully stabilized and airlifted to the nearest hospital, where a team of surgeons worked tirelessly to save her. Despite their efforts, the extent of her injuries proved too severe. Claire succumbed to her wounds later that evening, leaving behind a grieving community and a legacy of dedication to the wilderness she had loved. The tragedy sent shockwaves through the Park Service and the local community. Investigations revealed that Claire's proximity to the bear had triggered its defensive instincts, a sobering reminder of the inherent dangers of wildlife encounters in natural habitats. The incident underscored the importance of adhering to safety guidelines, respecting the boundaries of wild animals, and maintaining a safe distance at all times. Beginning to ascend a national park in a scenic mountain region in east-central California on a warm July morning in 2023. The golden light filtered through the towering trees, casting a serene glow over the landscape. For Emma, an experienced runner and outdoor enthusiast, it was the perfect day to explore the park's breathtaking wilderness. She had run the national park's main trails many times before, but this morning, she craved solitude. Veering off the beaten path, she followed a less trodden narrow trail that wound through the dense forest. The air was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of pine and damp soil. Emma's strides were rhythmic and confident as she navigated the uneven terrain, her breath sinking with the steady pounding of her feet. The forest was alive with the gentle rustling of leaves, distant bird calls, and the occasional chirp of a squirrel. She felt invigorated, the isolation of the untamed wilderness giving her a sense of freedom and escape from her otherwise busy life. As the trail narrowed and the vegetation thickened, Emma paid little attention to the warning signs she had passed earlier, reminders to stay on marked trails and be aware of wildlife, especially bears. She focused on the quiet beauty around her and the satisfying burn in her muscles as she pushed herself further. The faint hum of other hikers on the main trail had long faded, leaving her utterly alone in the wilderness. The peacefulness, however, masked nature's lurking unpredictability. Emma was unaware that her route had led her into an area frequented by black bears, drawn by the abundance of berries and other forage. One such bear, a young adult weighing nearly 200 pounds, had been feeding nearby. The bear, accustomed to humans from a distance but wary of close encounters, was startled by the sudden intrusion. Emma's footfalls, though faint to her, reverberated through the forest floor, catching the bear's attention. As she rounded a bend in the trail, the bear emerged from a thick brush just yards ahead. Both runner and bear froze, locking eyes for a fleeting moment. Emma's heart surged with panic as she realized the danger before her. The bear, sensing a threat in the sudden presence of a human, acted on instinct. With a deep, guttural huff, it charged. Emma spun on her heels, adrenaline coursing through her veins as she bolted in the opposite direction. Her breath came in frantic gasps, and her legs were pumping harder than ever. She knew black bears were fast, capable of reaching speeds up to 30 miles per hour, but she had no other option. The bear, driven by fear and aggression, closed the distance rapidly. Emma's surroundings blurred as branches tore at her arms and legs, and the forest became a chaotic maze of obstacles. Within seconds, the bear was upon her. It lunged, its claws catching her calf and sprawling to the ground. Pain exploded in her leg as she scrambled to her feet, but the bear swiped again, this time knocking her flat on her back. Emma screamed, the sound piercing the stillness of the forest, but there was no one to hear her. The bear's massive frame loomed over her, its breath hot and pungent, its eyes wild with fear and aggression. The first bite came to her thigh, a crushing pressure that sent shockwaves of agony through her body. Emma thrashed, using her arms to push against the bear's face, but its strength was overwhelming. The bear clawed at her torso, ripping through her shirt and tearing into her flesh. Emma's hands scrambled for anything she could use as a weapon, her fingers closing around a jagged rock. With every ounce of strength she could muster, she struck the bear's snout, a sensitive area. The blow startled it for a moment, causing it to recoil slightly. Seizing the opportunity, Emma tried to crawl away, her shredded legs dragging uselessly behind her. But the bear recovered quickly, pouncing again. This time it bit into her shoulder, shaking her like prey. Blood soaked the forest floor, the metallic scent mixing with the earthiness of the woods. Emma's vision blurred from the pain and blood loss, her screams fading into desperate gasps. She fought with every bit of strength, but her movements grew weaker as the bear's relentless assault continued. Eventually, the bear relented, either satisfied that the perceived threat was neutralized or distracted by a noise in the distance. It lumbered back into the forest, leaving Emma battered and barely conscious. The forest fell silent once more, save for the faint rustle of leaves and the ragged sound of Emma's breathing. She lay motionless on the ground, her body broken and her mind teetering on the edge of unconsciousness. Hours passed before a park ranger, conducting a routine patrol, stumbled upon the grisly scene. Emma was barely alive, her wounds severe and her pulse weak. The ranger immediately called for help, and within minutes, a rescue team arrived, airlifting her to the nearest hospital. The medical staff worked tirelessly to stabilize her, performing multiple surgeries to repair the extensive damage. Emma survived, but the ordeal left her with lasting scars, both physical and psychological. The attack sent shockwaves through the park and the broader community of outdoor enthusiasts. The national park, known for its stunning beauty and relatively low incidence of bear attacks, faced scrutiny for its safety measures. Park officials reiterated the importance of staying on designated trails, carrying bear spray and making noise while hiking or running to avoid startling wildlife. Wildlife experts analyzed the incident, noting that the bear's behavior was not abnormal. Though generally less aggressive than grizzlies, black bears can become dangerous when startled or cornered. The attack served as a grim reminder of the delicate balance between human recreation and wildlife conservation. Emma's story became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the risks of venturing into wild spaces. Though she eventually recovered, she could no longer run as she once had, her injuries leaving her with a permanent limp. She channeled her experience into advocacy, raising awareness about respecting wildlife and educating others on how to enjoy nature safely. The attack also prompted changes within the park. Additional signage warned visitors of the dangers of leaving marked trails, and rangers increased patrols in high-risk areas. Educational campaigns emphasized using bear spray and proper food storage to minimize human-bear encounters. Morning of May 16, 2021, Lena Hughes, a 29-year-old woman from Bozeman, Montana, set out for a jog on a popular trail near the town. Bozeman is a scenic area known for its proximity to the mountains and vast wilderness, making it a favorite spot for outdoor enthusiasts. Lena, a fitness enthusiast, had been running on this trail for months, enjoying the beautiful nature and the calm of the surroundings. She often jogged alone, feeling a sense of peace in the wild. The sun was shining, and the trail was quiet as she jogged through the woods. However, on this particular day, everything would change drastically. Lena's routine jog turned into a terrifying nightmare that would haunt her for the rest of her life. As she jogged, unaware of the dangers around her, she startled a grizzly bear. The bear, likely a male in search of food, had been rummaging through the woods and was taken by surprise at Lena's presence. It was a sudden encounter, and the bear, startled and confused, reacted quickly. Before Lena could react or even understand what was happening, the bear charged at her with incredible speed. The grizzly knocked Lena to the ground with terrifying force. She was thrown to the forest floor. The wind knocked out of her as the bear's massive paws pinned her down. Before she could even try to move or defend herself, the bear bit into her shoulder, its sharp teeth sinking into her flesh. The pain was excruciating, but Lena knew she had to act fast. Despite the shock, the intense pain, and the overwhelming fear, she managed to push through her panic. Lena knew that fighting the bear directly would be impossible, and she had to rely on her wits to escape. With every ounce of strength, she crawled toward a nearby tree, hoping to get high enough to evade the bear's reach. Her legs were weak from the shock and the pain, but she pushed herself up as much as she could. The bear continued to attack, but after what felt like an eternity, Lena managed to climb the tree just high enough to be out of the bear's immediate grasp. The bear, still agitated and hungry, lingered below the tree, pacing and growling, trying to find a way to get to Lena. Trembling and covered in blood, Lena clung to the tree with all her strength, praying for the bear to leave. The minutes dragged on, and the bear, seemingly losing interest in her, finally retreated into the forest. Lena remained in the tree, too terrified to move, for what felt like an eternity before the bear was completely out of sight. Still shaking and in unbearable pain, Lena knew she needed help, but she couldn't make herself move just yet. After several minutes, the adrenaline that had kept her alert began to fade, and she realized that her body was severely wounded. Her shoulder was torn, and the pain in her legs and back was overwhelming. As the bleeding continued, she mustered the strength to slowly descend from the tree. A few joggers who had been on the trail earlier passed by and found her collapsed on the ground. They were immediately alarmed by her condition and called for help. Lena was airlifted to the nearest hospital, her body covered in bandages. The attack had left her with deep wounds, but she was lucky to be alive. The pain Lena felt was unbearable, and as she was airlifted to the hospital, the full scope of the damage began to set in. She was severely wounded from the bear's attack, with deep puncture wounds on her shoulder where the bear's teeth had pierced her flesh. Her legs and arms were badly scratched, and the blood loss was significant. Despite the physical damage, Lena's mental state was just as affected. The trauma of the attack lingered in her mind, and it was clear that her love for the peaceful trail she once enjoyed would never be the same again. Lena's recovery was long and difficult. She required extensive surgery to repair the damage done to her shoulder, and her leg wounds needed time to heal. Over the following weeks, she underwent multiple procedures, each one a reminder of the bear that had nearly taken her life. The mental scars, however, proved harder to heal. Lena found it difficult to sleep, often waking in the night with her heart racing as she relived the attack. The once peaceful jogs through the wilderness now felt like a distant memory. The local community was shaken by Lena's attack. Bozeman, Montana, had always been a place where people enjoyed nature, often venturing into the woods for outdoor activities like hiking, running, and cycling. But after Lena's encounter with the grizzly, the town's residents began to reconsider the risks they took when enjoying the outdoors. More people started to avoid the trails, fearful of encountering wildlife, especially bears. The authorities took notice of the increasing concern and began to discuss how they could better protect citizens who ventured into bear country. For Lena, the aftermath was about more than just physical recovery. She struggled with her fear of nature, unable to look at the forests around Bozeman without feeling a sense of dread. The trails she once ran with ease now felt dangerous. She grappled with feelings of guilt and shame, as if she had done something wrong by unknowingly coming too close to the bear. It wasn't her fault, but that didn't make the fear go away. Months passed, and though Lena physically recovered, she never returned to the trails she once loved. The sight of a bear, even from a distance, filled her with terror. Her doctors advised her to consider counseling to help with the trauma, and though she resisted at first, she eventually agreed. Slowly, she began to work through her fear, but the memories of that day would always linger in the back of her mind. The incident also sparked new safety measures in the area. Local authorities and park officials began to educate the public more rigorously about bear safety. Bear-proof bins were placed in more areas, and hikers and joggers were reminded to make noise when on trails to avoid startling wildlife. These measures aimed to prevent future incidents like Lena's and ensure that the community could continue to enjoy nature safely. For Lena, though, the battle was ongoing. Her journey of recovery was far from over, but with time and support, she began to find a sense of peace again. She knew that she might never return to the trails, but she had learned valuable lessons about respecting the wilderness and the creatures that called it home. The scars would remain, but so would the lessons she had learned about survival and the power of resilience. The dense wilderness of Montana stretched endlessly in all directions, a tapestry of towering pines, jagged mountains, and vast, empty roads. It was a land of raw beauty and isolation, where nature reigned supreme, and humans were merely visitors passing through. On a crisp autumn morning in 2007, truck driver Dave Thompson rumbled along a lonely highway, hauling a trailer loaded with produce destined for a distant city. The road ahead was quiet, the hum of his engine, the only sound breaking the solitude. Dave had spent years navigating remote routes like these, his life revolving around the rhythm of the open road. A sturdy man in his late 40s, he prided himself on his ability to handle the challenges of long-haul trucking. The isolation suited him, and he relished the moments when he could pull over, stretch his legs, and take in the untouched beauty of the landscapes he traveled through. As the morning wore on, Dave decided to take a break. Spotting a small clearing on the side of the road, he eased his truck to a stop, the hiss of the brakes cutting through the stillness. He climbed from the cab, his boots crunching on gravel as he stretched his arms and shoulders. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the faint scent of pine needles and damp earth. He didn't notice the subtle shift in the atmosphere, the unnatural stillness that had settled over the forest nearby. Unbeknownst to Dave, a grizzly bear had been lurking in the vicinity, its keen sense of smell drawing it toward the truck. As the colder months approached, the massive creature with matted fur and sharp claws roamed the area for food. The scent of produce from Dave's trailer had piqued its interest, and it had been following the vehicle's path from the forest, its hunger sharpening its instincts. Dave turned his back to the trees, oblivious to the danger. He reached into the cab for a thermos of coffee, savoring the brief respite from his journey. The bear, hidden in the underbrush, watched him intently. When Dave moved, it interpreted his actions as a threat, its territorial nature overpowering its initial hesitation. In an instant, the bear charged. The attack came without warning. Dave turned just in time to see the massive creature barreling toward him, its sheer size and speed a horrifying blur. He barely had time to react before the bear collided, knocking him off his feet. The impact sent him sprawling onto the gravel, his breath forced from his lungs in a sharp gasp. The bear wasted no time, its primal instincts driving it to secure what it saw as its territory. Its claws raked across Dave's side, tearing through his jacket and into his flesh. Pain seared through him as he struggled to shield himself, his arms raised in a futile attempt to fend off the onslaught. The bear's teeth sank into his leg and he screamed, echoing into the wilderness. Desperation took hold. Through the haze of pain and adrenaline, Dave's hand groped blindly for anything he could use as a weapon. His fingers closed around the cold steel of a crowbar he had left leaning against the truck's tire. He swung the makeshift weapon with every ounce of strength, striking the bear across its shoulder. The blow caused the animal to pause, momentarily stunned. Dave seized the opportunity, swinging again, connecting with the bear's snout. The grizzly snarled, its eyes wild with rage and confusion. Blood dripped from its muzzle, and it backed away slightly, assessing its prey. Dave struggled to his feet, his body trembling and his breaths ragged. He leaned against the side of the truck for support, the crowbar held tightly in his bloodied hands. But the bear wasn't finished. It lunged again, swiping at Dave with a massive paw. The force of the blow sent him crashing back to the ground, his head striking the gravel. Stars danced in his vision, and his grip on the crowbar slackened. The bear loomed over him, its hot breath filling the air, and for a moment, it seemed as though the fight was over. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the bear stopped. Whether it was the lingering pain from Dave's blows or the distant hum of an approaching vehicle, something caused the animal to retreat. It let out a low growl before turning and lumbering back into the forest, its massive frame disappearing into the shadows. Dave lay motionless on the ground, his body a broken testament to the brutality of the attack. Blood pooled around him, staining the gravel as his breaths grew shallow. A passing motorist, alerted by the unusual sight of the parked truck and the commotion, pulled over and rushed to his aid. The man knelt beside Dave, his face pale as he surveyed the extent of the injuries. An emergency call was placed, and paramedics arrived as quickly as the remote location allowed. They worked frantically to stabilize Dave, but the damage was too severe. He had lost too much blood, and the wounds to his side and legs had caused irreversible trauma. Despite their efforts, Dave succumbed to his injuries before he could be transported to a hospital. The news of the attack sent shockwaves through the community and beyond. Wildlife experts later confirmed that the bear's behavior had been driven by hunger and the scent of food from the truck. The incident reignited discussions about the dangers of human-wildlife interactions, particularly in areas where natural habitats intersected with human activity. Dave Thompson's tragic death became a somber reminder of nature's unpredictability and the fine line between coexistence and conflict. His story, which was shared widely in the following months, served as a cautionary tale for those venturing into the wilderness, urging respect for the powerful creatures that call it home. The snow had only just begun to melt in early spring 2024, revealing the rugged beauty of Alaska's untamed wilderness. The air was crisp and biting, carrying the earthy scent of thawing soil and pine. Ben, a seasoned hiker in his late 30s, had waited months for the trails to open up. This time of year was his favorite, the quiet solitude of the forest before the summer influx of adventurers. He relished the challenge of remote, unmarked paths, trusting his experience and preparation to guide him through the wilderness. At his side trotted Bailey, a loyal German Shepherd mix with boundless energy and a keen nose. Bailey had been Ben's companion on countless hikes, an extra set of senses in the unpredictable wild. Together, they made a formidable pair, navigating the vast landscapes with mutual trust and ease. That morning, the pair had set out on a trail near a national park in the central area of the Alaska Range, a route known for its dense forests and occasional wildlife sightings. The trail wound through towering evergreens, their branches heavy with lingering snow. Bailey's paws crunched against the soft, thawing ground, mingled with the distant call of ravens overhead. Ben felt at peace, his pack snug against his back and his hiking boots firmly gripping the uneven terrain. He kept an eye on the trail markers etched into tree trunks, their faint carvings guiding him deeper into the forest. The serenity was interrupted when Bailey suddenly froze, his ears perked and tail stiff. A low, guttural growl rumbled from the dog's throat before erupting into a series of sharp, frantic barks. Startled, Ben stopped in his tracks and scanned the surroundings. The thick brush on either side of the trail made visibility difficult, and the forest's usual stillness had vanished. Bailey continued barking, his posture rigid, as if warning off an unseen threat. Then came the sound, a deep, resonant huff, followed by the unmistakable rustle of something massive moving through the underbrush. Ben's heart raced as he turned toward the noise. The bear emerged suddenly, its enormous frame pushing through the foliage with alarming speed. It was a grizzly, its brown fur streaked with dirt and its eyes dark and focused. Agitated by Bailey's barking, the bear reared up briefly, its sheer size dwarfing man and dog. Instinct took over as Ben reached for the bear spray on his belt, but he barely had time to unclip it. The bear dropped back to all fours and charged, its powerful strides covering the distance in seconds. Bailey darted forward, barking furiously, trying to protect his owner. The bear, agitated and defensive, turned its attention to the dog, swiping with its massive paw. Bailey narrowly dodged the blow, his barking growing louder and more frantic. Ben knew he had to act quickly. He yelled, waving his arms to divert the bear's focus, but it was too late. The grizzly's territorial instincts had been triggered, and its aggression shifted fully to the perceived threat, Bailey and Ben. The bear barreled past the dog and slammed into Ben, knocking him off his feet. He hit the ground hard, the breath forced from his lungs as the bear's claws raked across his chest. The pain was immediate and excruciating. Ben tried to shield his face and neck with his arms as the bear's massive paw came down again, tearing into him with terrifying force. Bailey barked wildly, circling the bear desperately, attempting to draw it away. The grizzly lashed out at the dog, sending Bailey tumbling into the brush. Ben struggled to crawl backward, his body screaming in protest with every movement. Blood soaked his clothes, and his vision blurred from the pain. He managed to grab the bear spray that had fallen nearby and aimed it toward the grizzly, unleashing a cloud of the potent deterrent. The bear recoiled briefly, its eyes watering and nostrils flaring. For a moment, Ben thought it might retreat, but the bear's aggression outweighed its discomfort. The attack resumed with relentless ferocity. The grizzly swiped at Ben's legs, dragging him across the rough ground as he screamed into the wilderness. His desperate cries echoed through the trees, but no one was around to hear them. The bear's jaws closed around his shoulder, shaking him violently before releasing him and returning to clawing at his chest and face. Ben's mind raced, alternating between thoughts of survival and an overwhelming fear that this was the end. At some point, Bailey re-emerged, charging at the bear with renewed determination. The dog's distraction worked momentarily, and the grizzly turned to confront this smaller but persistent adversary. In the chaos, Ben managed to drag himself toward a cluster of trees, his bloodied hands clawing at the dirt. He could no longer see what was happening to Bailey, but the sounds of snarling, growling, and barking filled the air. And then silence. The bear, seemingly satisfied, lumbered back into the forest, leaving behind a scene of devastation. Ben lay motionless, his body broken, and his strength nearly gone. The pain was overwhelming, his breath shallow and labored. He tried to call out for Bailey, but his voice was barely a whisper. The dog was nowhere in sight. Hours passed before a search party found him, alerted by Ben's failure to check in with a ranger station. The rescuers were horrified by the sight. Ben, bloodied and barely conscious, sprawled on the forest floor. His clothes were shredded, and deep gashes covered his chest, arms, and legs. He was rushed to the nearest hospital, where surgeons worked tirelessly to save him. The injuries were severe: multiple fractures, puncture wounds, and extensive blood loss. But against all odds, Ben survived. Bailey, however, was never found. Search efforts continued for days, but no trace of the dog could be located. It was assumed that Bailey had been killed and carried off by the bear, a tragic end for the loyal companion who had tried to protect his owner. The incident sent shockwaves through the local hiking community. News of the attack spread quickly, sparking debates about the dangers of venturing into bear territory and the precautions hikers should take. Wildlife experts emphasized the importance of staying vigilant and minimizing risks, such as keeping dogs leashed and avoiding areas with recent bear activity. The tragedy also prompted renewed discussions about human encroachment into wildlife habitats, highlighting the delicate balance between recreation and conservation. For Ben, the recovery process was long and arduous. His physical wounds slowly healed, but the emotional scars remained. The memory of the attack haunted him, the image of the bear's immense form and the sound of Bailey's final barks etched into his mind. Though he was grateful to be alive, the loss of his dog weighed heavily on him, a painful reminder of the price paid in the wilderness. In time, Ben returned to hiking, though he never ventured as far or as deep into the wild as he once had. He carried the lessons of that day with him, a sobering reminder of nature's power and unpredictability. The beautiful and untamed wilderness was not a place to be taken lightly, a truth he would carry with him for the rest of his life. Summer of 2024, teenagers Charlie and Rachel, both 16, decided to go on a hiking adventure in Wyoming's Bridger-Teton National Forest. The two friends, passionate about nature and outdoor activities, were excited to explore the trails and experience the beauty of the forest. Charlie and Rachel had known each other since elementary school, and shared a love for hiking. They had been on several smaller hikes together, but this time they wanted to take on a more challenging route. The Bridger-Teton National Forest, known for its rugged terrain, dense woods, and wildlife, was an ideal location for their adventure. Located in western Wyoming, it is home to diverse animals, including bears, elk, and wolves. Charlie and Rachel were well prepared for the hike, packing essential supplies like water, snacks, and a first aid kit, but neither of them anticipated what was about to happen that day. On the second day of their hike, around noon, they were trekking through a particularly dense section of the forest. The air was fresh, the sun shone through the trees, and the sounds of birds filled the atmosphere. As they walked along the trail, they came across a small clearing near a stream where they paused to take some pictures and enjoy the scenery. They had no idea that a grizzly bear, which had been foraging for food nearby, was also in the area. The bear, startled by their presence, charged out from behind a cluster of trees. The massive grizzly, likely surprised and defensive of its territory, reacted swiftly. Rachel, who was closer to the bear when it emerged, was thrown into a nearby tree by the force of the attack. She felt the sharp impact and struggled to get back on her feet, her body bruised and battered. Charlie, though shocked, quickly tried to think of a way to protect them both. He reached for the flare he had packed in case of emergencies, hoping to use it to scare the bear away. With his hands shaking from fear, Charlie attempted to light the flare, but before he could make any progress, the bear lunged at him. It knocked him to the ground with terrifying strength, its powerful jaws sinking into his leg. The pain was immediate and excruciating, but he held on to his determination to survive. Rachel, despite her injuries, managed to push through the pain. She gathered what little strength she had left to get up and help Charlie, who was still struggling to fend off the bear. She grabbed Charlie's arm and pulled him toward the nearby cabin they had seen earlier on the trail. The bear, sensing the struggle and the movements of the humans, momentarily backed off, giving them a chance to escape. As Rachel and Charlie ran toward the cabin, their hearts raced with fear. Despite being injured, Rachel kept her focus on getting to safety. Charlie limped, trying to keep up, his leg bleeding from the bear's bite. The pain was unbearable, but adrenaline pushed him forward. With each step, they grew closer to the cabin, but they knew they weren't out of danger yet. The bear could be anywhere, watching them from the shadows. The cabin, small and secluded, was about half a mile from where the attack had happened. As they neared it, they saw a figure approaching in the distance. It was a local ranger who had been patrolling the area. He had heard the noise and come to investigate. Seeing the teens in distress, the ranger rushed to their side, helping them into the cabin and locking the door behind them. He immediately began treating their wounds. Charlie's leg was severely torn, and Rachel had bruises and cuts from her fall and the force of the bear's attack. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, the ranger radioed for backup. He stayed with the teens, doing his best to calm them while they waited for the rescue team. Outside the cabin, the tension was palpable. They all knew that the bear could still be nearby, waiting to return. The ranger kept a close eye on the area, using his training to ensure that the teens were safe. By the time the rescue team arrived, it was clear that Charlie needed immediate medical attention. His leg was badly injured, and while Rachel's wounds were not life-threatening, they also required care. The rescue team quickly set to work, ensuring both teens were stabilized before they were airlifted to a nearby hospital. The trauma of the attack weighed heavily on them both, but they were alive. They owed their survival to each other's quick thinking and the ranger who had arrived just in time. After the attack, the forest area where Charlie and Rachel had been hiking was temporarily closed off. Local authorities feared that the bear, still roaming nearby, could pose a threat to others. Rangers and wildlife experts scoured the area for the bear, ensuring it was no longer a danger to the public. Eventually, the bear was tracked down, but not before it had caused this devastating encounter. In the aftermath, both teens underwent treatment for their injuries. Charlie's leg required surgery, and Rachel's bruises healed over time, but the emotional scars would last far longer. The trauma of that day, of being attacked by a bear in the wild, would stay with them forever. Despite their survival, they both felt an overwhelming sense of fear whenever they thought about returning to the wilderness. The event served as a stark reminder of the unpredictable nature of wildlife encounters, even for experienced hikers. Their story gained attention, prompting authorities to discuss better safety measures for hikers in bear country. New protocols were implemented to ensure that hikers in popular areas like the Bridger-Teton National Forest would receive more information about the risks of bear encounters. The attack left a mark on the community, and the teens' bravery in the face of danger served as a reminder to always be vigilant in the wild. The crisp autumn air in a national park located in interior Alaska carried the scent of pine and earth as Adrian Forster, a 34-year-old outdoor enthusiast, ventured deep into Alaska's untamed wilderness. A seasoned hiker with years of experience exploring rugged terrain, Adrian craved solitude and the kind of peace that only untouched landscapes could provide. On this particular trip, he sought to push himself further than ever, trekking miles beyond the park's marked trails into the heart of the wild. His pack was heavy with supplies, maps, a first aid kit, a satellite phone, and food. He carried bear spray on his hip and a knife in his pocket, a small comfort in an environment where the line between predator and prey blurred. In early September 2024, the weather was ideal for hiking. The days were still warm enough to be pleasant, and the nights were cool enough to make the stars seem brighter. Adrian had meticulously planned this trip, poring over maps and weather reports, ensuring every detail of his journey was accounted for. Yet no amount of preparation could account for the unpredictable nature of the wilderness he loved so dearly. Adrian had been hiking for hours that day, following a remote ridge that provided sweeping views of the valleys below. Rolling tundra hills stretched out in every direction, a patchwork of golden grass and dark green spruce. He paused occasionally to take in the scenery, his breath hitching at the sight of distant snow-capped peaks. The only sounds were the crunch of his boots on the dirt and the soft rustle of the wind through the trees. But as the afternoon wore on, a strange stillness settled over the landscape. The usual chatter of birds and the distant calls of animals faded, replaced by an oppressive silence that set his nerves on edge. The unease was initially subtle, an instinctual awareness that something was out of place. Adrian shrugged it off, reminding himself that the wilderness was inherently unpredictable. He adjusted the straps of his pack and pressed onward, his eyes scanning the ground for signs of wildlife. He had seen bear tracks earlier in the day, but they were old, the edges worn by rain and time. He reasoned that the bear was long gone, likely far from his current location. Then, as Adrian rounded a bend in the ridge, he saw it. A shadow emerged from the trees below, massive and unmistakable, a grizzly bear. Its golden-brown coat glistened in the sunlight, and its powerful muscles rippled as it moved. It seemed unaware of Adrian's presence for a moment, its head low as it sniffed the air. But then, the bear's head snapped up, and its dark eyes locked onto him. The moment stretched, heavy and charged, as the bear assessed him from a distance. Adrian's heart pounded as he froze, trying to remember his training. He knew the bear hadn't charged yet, and there was still a chance to defuse the situation. But before he could move, the bear reared up, its massive frame towering above the ground, and let out a deep, guttural roar that echoed across the ridge. The time for strategy was gone. The bear dropped to all fours and charged. Adrian turned and ran, knowing full well that it was futile. His legs burned as he sprinted downhill, the terrain uneven and treacherous. His pack felt like dead weight, slowing him as the bear closed the gap with terrifying speed. He reached for his bear spray, fumbling with the clasp as his mind raced. The bear was on him before he could raise the canister, its momentum knocking him to the ground. The impact drove the air from Adrian's lungs as he hit the earth, pain radiating through his body. The bear's claws raked across his back, tearing through his jacket and skin. He tried to roll away, but the animal pinned him with its massive paw, its breath hot and rancid against his neck. Desperation took hold as Adrian reached for the knife in his pocket, his fingers trembling as they found the handle. He managed to unsheath the blade and swung blindly, the sharp edge slicing into the bear's shoulder. The grizzly roared in pain, momentarily retreating, but its anger grew. It lunged again, this time clamping its jaws around Adrian's leg. The pain was excruciating, a white-hot fire that consumed him as the bear shook its head violently, dragging him across the dirt. Adrian's vision blurred as he swung the knife again, this time striking the bear's face. The blade cut into its cheek, and the animal let go, growling as it backed away. Adrian seized the moment, his body screaming in protest as he crawled toward a nearby boulder. He pressed his back against it, using it as a barrier between himself and the bear. His hands fumbled for the bear spray, finally freeing it from its holster. The bear circled him, its growls low and menacing movements deliberate. Blood dripped from its wounds, staining the dirt beneath its paws. Adrian raised the canister, his hand shaking as he prepared to fire. But before he could act, the bear charged again, its massive body colliding with the boulder. The impact force sent Adrian sprawling, the canister flying from his grip. He scrambled to his feet, but his injured leg buckled beneath him. The bear loomed over him, its teeth bared and eyes wild. Adrian raised his knife one last time, but his strength was gone. The animal struck him with a devastating blow, and the world darkened. Days later, a search team found Adrian's body near the ridge. His pack lay nearby, its contents scattered across the ground, and claw marks scarred the surrounding rocks. The Grizzly was nowhere to be seen, having returned to the forest after the attack. Adrian's death sent shockwaves through the park and the wider outdoor community. He had been experienced, prepared and cautious, yet none of it had been enough to save him from the unpredictable dangers of the wild. Following the tragedy, park officials urged hikers to take even greater precautions when venturing into grizzly territory. They emphasized the importance of traveling in groups, making noise to avoid surprising wildlife, and carrying bear spray within easy reach. Adrian's story became a sobering reminder of nature's raw power and the thin line between adventure and survival. For those who followed in his footsteps, the wilderness would never feel the same again. September 25, 2024, in the snow-covered forests of Wyoming, the day began like any other for Officer Adam Miller and his partner, Sarah Bennett. Both were seasoned police officers known for their dedication and bravery. Adam, a 37-year-old father of two, had been on the force for 15 years. His calm demeanor made him a pillar of strength in their department. Sarah, 29, had joined the force 3 years prior. With her sharp instincts and unyielding determination, she quickly gained respect among her peers. Adam and Sarah were patrolling near the Wind River Range, an area known for its rugged beauty and dangerous wildlife. Around noon, they received a call about a potential injured animal sighting deep in the forest. Local authorities suspected poaching activity, a growing problem in the region. The two officers were dispatched to investigate, equipped with standard gear but unaware of the peril awaiting them. The drive to the remote site was treacherous. Snow blanketed the narrow roads, and towering pines cast long shadows under the overcast sky. By 2 p.m., they reached the location and parked their vehicle. A chilling silence enveloped the area, broken only by the occasional rustling. As they walked deeper into the woods, they came across a tragic scene. A massive grizzly bear lying lifeless in the snow. Evidence of poaching was clear. The bear had been shot multiple times, and its paws had been crudely severed, likely for illegal trade. The officers were overcome with anger and sorrow at the senseless act. While Adam examined the bear's wounds, Sarah scanned the surroundings for clues. Suddenly, the sound of snapping branches caught her attention. She turned to see a colossal grizzly emerging from the thicket, its eyes blazing with fury. It was clear this bear was no ordinary encounter. It had likely been the mate of the poached animal, and now it was driven by rage. Before Adam could react, the bear charged with startling speed. It struck him with its massive paw, sending him sprawling to the ground. The force broke several ribs and left Adam struggling to breathe as the bear began to maul him viciously. Sarah raised her firearm, but the bear was relentless. She aimed and fired, but the bear turned its attention to her before she could act again. The bear slashed Sarah across the face, leaving deep bleeding wounds that blurred her vision. In sheer panic and pain, Sarah staggered back, realizing she was outmatched. Summoning her remaining strength, she retreated toward their vehicle, using the forest's dense cover to evade the bear. Back at the car, she managed to call for backup before collapsing from exhaustion and blood loss. The forest fell silent once more, save for the distant roar of the bear and the soft hum of approaching sirens. The nightmare was far from over, but reinforcements were on their way. The scene of terror would remain etched in Sarah's mind forever. As Sarah lay near the patrol vehicle, the faint sound of sirens in the distance gave her hope. Her vision was blurred by the blood trickling from her wounds, and her body trembled in the freezing cold. Every second felt like an eternity, and the harrowing sounds of the bear's roars still echoed in her mind. The backup team responding to her distress call arrived within an hour, bringing with them paramedics and wildlife experts. The rescue team found the scene more horrifying than they could have imagined. Adam's lifeless body was discovered near the remains of the poached bear. His injuries were extensive, with deep lacerations and multiple fractures caused by the bear's relentless attack. Sarah, barely conscious, was immediately treated for her injuries on site. Her face bore severe claw marks, and her body showed signs of extensive bruising from her desperate escape. The paramedics stabilized Sarah and transported her to the nearest hospital, where she was rushed into surgery. Meanwhile, the wildlife officers began tracking the bear, knowing the animal still posed a significant danger. The trail led them deeper into the forest, where the bear's tracks mingled with the blood-stained snow. The team acted cautiously, understanding the unpredictable nature of an enraged grizzly. Hours later, the bear was located in another part of the forest, where it had taken refuge. After careful deliberation, the officers made the decision to euthanize the animal. They recognized the tragedy of the situation, both for the bear, whose mate had been killed, and for the officers who had become victims of the encounter. Back in town, Sarah's recovery was slow and painful. The physical scars were matched by the emotional trauma she carried from that day. She struggled to cope with the loss of Adam, who had been more than just a colleague. Their bond as partners had been forged over years of shared challenges and victories on the force. His absence left a void that no one could fill. Adam's funeral was held a week later, attended by hundreds of fellow officers, friends, and family members. He was remembered as a dedicated officer, a loving father, and a hero who had given his life in the line of duty. Sarah, though still recovering, attended the ceremony with her face partially bandaged. She delivered a heartfelt tribute, vowing to honor his memory by advocating for stricter measures against poaching and increased safety protocols for officers working in wildlife zones. The incident sent shockwaves through the community and beyond. Local authorities launched an extensive investigation into the poaching activity, determined to bring those responsible to justice. The event also reignited conversations about the delicate balance between human activity and wildlife preservation. Conservationists emphasized the need for better education and enforcement to prevent such tragic encounters in the future. For Sarah, the path to healing was long and arduous. She underwent multiple surgeries to repair the damage caused by the bear's claws and endured months of physical therapy. Despite the challenges, she returned to the force, driven by a renewed sense of purpose. Her experience became a powerful reminder of the dangers faced by those who protect and serve, often at great personal cost. The forest where the attack occurred remained a somber place, marked by the memory of that fateful Christmas day. A memorial plaque was later installed near the site, honoring Adam's sacrifice and serving as a stark reminder of the unpredictable forces of nature. For those who visited, it was a place to reflect on the fragility of life and the courage of those who risk everything to uphold their duty. British Columbia's remote wilderness, on October 14, 2023, Mark Davis, a 48-year-old experienced hunter, ventured deep into the forest. Mark had spent years hunting in the vast Canadian wilderness and was familiar with the landscape, the sounds of the forest, and the dangers that came with hunting in such a remote area. His passion for hunting had begun at a young age, as his father, also an avid hunter, had taken him out into the woods when he was a child. Over the years, Mark had developed a strong understanding of wildlife and honed his skills as a hunter. He enjoyed the solitude the forest provided and found peace in tracking deer through the dense woods. On that fateful day in October, Mark set out with his hunting partner, Robert, a 50-year-old experienced hunter himself. The two men had planned a deer hunt in the rugged terrain of British Columbia. They knew the area well and had hunted there many times before. Mark and Robert spent hours tracking their prey, moving quietly through the forest. They understood that patience was key in hunting, especially in bear territory, which was home to a variety of wildlife, including grizzly bears. While Mark was an experienced hunter, he knew that grizzly bears could be unpredictable, especially if they felt threatened. As they walked along a deer trail, Mark suddenly stopped. He had noticed something unusual. The air around him felt different, and he could sense that something was amiss. His instincts, honed over years of experience in the woods, told him that they were not alone. Mark and Robert cautiously surveyed the area, trying to spot any signs of wildlife. They knew that bears were often in the vicinity, especially around this time of year when they were preparing for winter. Without warning, a massive grizzly bear burst from the brush, charging directly toward them. The bear, likely startled or feeling threatened, attacked without hesitation. Mark barely had time to react before the bear knocked him to the ground with terrifying force. As he attempted to defend himself with his rifle, the weapon misfired, and the bear began mauling him. The pain was immediate and intense, as the grizzly's powerful jaws and claws tore into Mark's arms and legs. Robert, witnessing the attack, rushed forward, trying to help his friend. He yelled, attempting to distract the bear, but it turned on him, causing him to stumble backward. Although Robert was injured, he managed to fire a few shots with his firearm. The bear, startled by the loud noise, momentarily retreated, giving Robert a chance to pull Mark to safety. However, Mark's injuries were severe, and he was losing blood fast. With the bear momentarily retreating, Robert dragged Mark away from the dangerous spot and began to assess the damage. Mark was in a state of shock, his breathing shallow, and blood staining the ground beneath him. Robert knew that time was critical. He had to get Mark to safety and call for help. The woods around them were quiet, almost too quiet, and the reality of the situation began to sink in. Robert quickly looked around. Seeing no immediate signs of the bear's return, he knew they couldn't waste any more time. The struggle had taken a toll on both men. Mark, badly injured, was unable to walk, and Robert was shaken by the attack. His hands trembled as he tried to apply pressure to Mark's wounds. The pain Mark was feeling was unbearable, but he managed to stay conscious, gripping the hunting knife he had on him. Robert, though injured as well, knew he had to focus on getting help. They had come to a remote part of the wilderness, far from the nearest ranger station, and their only option was to make their way to the truck parked several miles away. The hike to safety was daunting, but it was their only chance. As Robert helped Mark to his feet, the bear, having been scared off earlier, reappeared in the distance. The sight of it sent a wave of panic through Robert. The bear was circling them, and they were both vulnerable. Robert grabbed his rifle and fired a few warning shots into the air, hoping to scare the bear away again. The loud noise caused the bear to hesitate for a moment, but it continued to watch them intently. Robert didn't wait for another attack. He moved quickly, helping Mark toward the truck as fast as his injured body could manage. Mark was growing weaker with every step, and it was clear that his injuries were more severe than Robert had realized. He was bleeding heavily, and Robert could feel his friend's strength fading. They stumbled along the trail, with Mark relying on Robert for support. The trees loomed overhead, casting long shadows, but there was no time to stop or rest. Robert pushed forward, knowing that Mark's life depended on getting to the truck. When they finally reached the truck, Robert called for help, providing a description of their location and explaining the severity of Mark's injuries. Within minutes, emergency services were on their way, but Mark's condition was deteriorating quickly. The long hours of struggling to move, combined with the severity of the bear attack, had taken their toll on him. As the rescue team arrived, it was clear that Mark would need immediate medical attention. Mark was airlifted to the hospital, where doctors worked tirelessly to save his life. Though he survived, the trauma from the bear attack left permanent scars, both physical and emotional. His legs were severely damaged, and he faced a long recovery. The attack also had a profound impact on him mentally. The once confident hunter was now haunted by the experience, a constant reminder of how dangerous the wilderness could be. 2024. The dry October air was heavy with the scent of sagebrush as Mark and Jason Keller walked the perimeter of their family's remote ranch in the foothills of Wyoming's Wind River Range. The brothers, aged 37 and 34, had grown up on this land, tending livestock and working long days under the wide open skies. They knew it was a life filled with hard labor and moments of quiet beauty. As the sun climbed over the horizon that morning, they set out to check on sheep grazing in a distant pasture near the forest's edge. The ranch bordered miles of wilderness, a landscape teeming with wildlife. The elder brother, Mark, carried a weathered rifle over his shoulder, a precaution more than anything else. Predators were a rare nuisance, and the brothers had grown confident in handling the occasional coyote or stray wolf. Carrying a pitchfork, Jason trailed behind, scanning the landscape for signs of trouble. The sheep were spread across a gentle slope, their bleats punctuating the morning. As they moved closer, they noticed an unusual tension among the herd. The sheep clustered tightly together, their heads low and their movements skittish. Mark stopped, narrowing his eyes at the tree line. That was when they saw it, a large black bear moving through the underbrush. Its sleek fur was matted in places, and a patch of dried blood stained its side. The bear moved awkwardly, its gait uneven. At first, the brothers were surprised. Black bears were not uncommon in this part of Wyoming, but they rarely came so close to human activity, especially during daylight hours. Something about this bear felt different. Its movements were erratic, and its head swung low as if disoriented. Mark's brow furrowed as he whispered instructions to Jason, gesturing toward the sheep. They both understood the importance of protecting the livestock, but neither realized the danger they were walking into. The brothers began shouting, their voices cutting through the crisp air. They banged their tools against rocks and fence posts, hoping to scare the bear off. It seemed to hesitate momentarily, lifting its head to look at them. But instead of retreating, the bear's posture shifted. Its ears flattened against its head, and it let out a low, guttural growl that rumbled through the valley. It charged. Mark barely had time to react before the bear closed the distance, barreling into him with the force of a freight train. The impact knocked him to the ground, his rifle skidding out of reach. The bear's claws raked across his chest, tearing through his coat and into the flesh beneath. Mark screamed, the sound raw and primal, as he struggled to fend off the massive animal. Jason froze for a split second, the scene unfolding like a nightmare. Then instinct took over. He gripped the pitchfork tightly and thrust the sharp tines at the bear's side. The bear roared, reverberating in Jason's chest like thunder, but it did not relent. It turned its massive head toward him, its dark eyes blazing with fury, and swiped with one powerful paw. The blow sent Jason sprawling, the pitchfork flying from his hands. Pain exploded in his shoulder as he hit the ground, but he forced himself to get up. Blood oozed from his arm, but adrenaline pushed him forward. He reached for a nearby rock and hurled it at the bear, aiming for its head. The stone struck its mark, and for a moment, the bear recoiled. Mark lay motionless on the ground, his breath shallow and labored. Jason staggered toward his brother, his eyes darting between Mark's broken body and the enraged bear. He grabbed a fallen branch, swinging it wildly as the bear advanced again. Desperation fueled his every movement, but the bear was relentless, its injuries and hunger driving it into a frenzy. The fight was brutal and chaotic, the ground around them torn and bloodied. Jason managed to land a few blows, but each effort only seemed to agitate the bear further. It lunged at him, its jaws snapping inches from his face. Jason fell backward, the branch clutched in his trembling hands as the bear loomed over him. He could feel its hot breath, smell the coppery tang of its blood mixed with his own. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the attack ended. The bear stood over Jason momentarily longer, its body heaving with exertion. Its eyes seemed to glaze over as it sniffed the air, and then it turned and lumbered back toward the forest. The brothers were left in the eerie silence of the aftermath, the only sounds of their ragged breathing and the distant bleating of the sheep. Jason crawled to Mark, his heart sinking at the sight of his brother's lifeless eyes staring up at the sky. He pressed his hand to Mark's chest, but there was no heartbeat, no sign of life. Tears blurred his vision as he realized he was too late. Despite his injuries, Jason knew he had to get help. He stumbled to his feet, clutching his bleeding arm, and began the long trek back to the ranch. Every step was agony, but the thought of alerting anyone kept him moving. When he finally reached the ranch house, he collapsed on the porch, his body giving out from pain and exhaustion. Emergency responders arrived within the hour, alerted by a frantic call from Jason's wife. They found Mark's body near the pasture, surrounded by evidence of the violent struggle. Jason was airlifted to the nearest hospital, where he underwent emergency surgery to repair the damage from the bear's claws and teeth. He survived, but the physical and emotional scars would remain with him for the rest of his life. The incident sent shockwaves through the small ranching community. Wildlife experts later determined that the bear had likely been injured in a territorial fight with another bear, leaving it desperate and more aggressive than usual. Its weakened state had driven it closer to human activity in search of an easy meal, leading to the fatal encounter with the Keller brothers. Discussions about wildlife safety and preparedness gained renewed urgency in the following weeks. Ranchers were urged to carry bear spray and ensure they had clear plans for deterring predators without putting themselves at risk. Jason became a reluctant advocate for these measures, sharing his harrowing story to prevent others from making the same mistakes. Mark's death was a devastating loss, a reminder of the fragile balance between humans and the wild. For Jason, the memory of that day would never fade. The sight of his brother fighting for his life, the deafening roars of the bear, and the realization that even the most experienced outdoors people are not invincible in the face of nature's raw power. On a quiet evening in August 2023, Mark, a seasoned camper known for his love of the outdoors, ventured into the heart of Alaska's remote forests. He was no stranger to the wilderness. Over the years, he had explored countless trails and survived harsh weather conditions. At 45 years old, Mark was respected in his hiking community for his resourcefulness and knowledge of survival skills. His favorite pastime was escaping the hustle of city life to find solace in nature's untouched beauty. This particular journey was meant to be a short getaway. Equipped with a sturdy tent, basic camping gear, and his trusted survival knife, Mark planned for a peaceful night under the stars. By late afternoon, he reached a secluded clearing, surrounded by towering pines and the soft hum of a nearby stream. As the sun began to set, the vibrant orange hues reflected off the water, casting a serene glow across the campsite. At 11 p.m., Mark was preparing his campfire, a routine he had performed countless times. The crackle of the flames provided warmth and comfort in the chilly night. Suddenly, the rustling of leaves broke the calm. Mark froze, his senses heightened. He turned toward the sound, expecting perhaps a deer or another harmless animal. Instead, emerging from the dense brush, a massive grizzly bear stood before him, its size amplified by the shadows of the firelight. The bear's sudden appearance startled Mark. Before he could react, the animal charged with a force that knocked him off his feet. The initial blow left him dazed, and he barely had time to grasp his knife before the bear was upon him. Its powerful jaws clamped down, tearing into his chest. Mark suffered deep gashes across his torso, blood soaking his shirt as the bear mauled him relentlessly. He tried to fend it off, swinging his knife in desperation, but his strength was waning with each passing second. The bear's aggression seemed endless, and Mark felt his energy draining. Yet, as suddenly as it had attacked, the bear paused, its focus shifting. Perhaps satisfied or sensing no further threat, it began to retreat into the darkness, leaving Mark battered and bleeding. As the adrenaline wore off, Mark's mind raced with the realization of his condition. He was alone, gravely injured, and miles from help. With dawn still hours away, Mark mustered his remaining strength. The cold intensified his pain, each shallow breath a reminder of the gaping wounds on his chest. The night dragged on as he lay motionless, conserving what little energy he had, waiting for the first light of day to guide him to safety. On the morning after Mark endured the harrowing bear attack, the sun rose over the vast Alaskan wilderness, casting a pale golden light over the dense forests and rocky terrain. Despite his excruciating pain and critical injuries, Mark's survival instincts took over. He knew he had to act quickly if he wanted to live. His chest throbbed with agony, and the deep gashes from the bear's claws made every breath a struggle. The bear's mauling had left his chest severely injured, with lacerations and bruises covering his torso. Weak but determined, Mark began crawling in the direction of the ranger station he had seen on his map earlier. Each inch forward was a victory, though the effort drained him quickly. The ground beneath him was uneven, littered with roots and rocks, and the weight of his injuries pressed him further into the earth. His movements caused fresh pain to radiate from his wounds, and blood seeped through the makeshift bandage he had fashioned from his torn shirt. Yet he held on to the hope that help was within reach. The journey was grueling. Hours stretched on as Mark dragged himself through the wilderness, pausing only to catch shallow breaths and reassess his path. The memories of the bear's attack replayed in his mind. He remembered the immense size of the beast, the sound of its growls, and the sheer force of its charge. Despite the trauma, he focused on staying alert, fearing another predator might emerge. By midday, Mark's energy was nearly gone. Dehydration and blood loss made him lightheaded, and he began to question whether he could continue. But then, in the distance, he spotted a sign of human presence, a trail marker indicating the direction of the ranger station. The sight renewed his determination, and he pushed forward inch by inch, ignoring the searing pain in his chest and limbs. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mark reached the ranger station. It was a small wooden structure surrounded by tall trees. He used the last of his strength to knock on the door, his voice barely audible as he called out for help. The rangers inside quickly sprang into action, shocked by the sight of his injuries. They noted the deep claw marks across his chest and the pallor of his skin, indicating significant blood loss. An airlift was arranged immediately. Mark was carefully transported to the nearest hospital, where medical staff worked tirelessly to stabilize him. The doctors commended his resilience, amazed that he had managed to survive the ordeal and make it to safety on his own. The wounds on his chest required extensive stitches, and his recovery would involve months of physical therapy to regain his strength. News of Mark's encounter spread quickly, sparking discussions about the dangers of camping in bear territory and the importance of preparedness. Experts highlighted the need for campers to carry bear spray, avoid hiking alone, and store food properly to minimize the chances of an encounter. For Mark, the aftermath of the attack was more than physical. While his body slowly healed, the emotional scars remained. He found himself reliving the terror in his dreams, often waking in a cold sweat. Yet, as the weeks turned into months, he resolved to use his experience as a lesson. He began sharing his story with others, emphasizing the respect and caution that nature demands. Mark never returned to the Alaskan wilderness, but his love for the outdoors persisted in a different form. He became an advocate for wilderness safety, encouraging others to explore responsibly and with the right tools. Though the attack had changed him forever, it also gave him a newfound appreciation for life and the resilience of the human spirit. On New Year's Eve 2019, a cold, silent night enveloped the snow-covered wilderness near a national park in the northwest corner of Wyoming. A secluded cabin stood amidst towering pines, its windows aglow with a crackling fire's soft, flickering light. Inside, three friends, Sarah, Jessica, and Megan, gathered to ring in the new year, far from the city's noise. The cabin, rented on a whim, offered a perfect retreat. Its isolation was a welcome escape from the chaos of everyday life. The women had packed champagne, snacks, and laughter, determined to make this a memorable night. The trio, longtime friends, had spent the evening drinking heavily. Empty wine bottles lined the counter, and the remnants of a hastily assembled charcuterie board were scattered on the table. Their voices echoed with unbridled joy as they recounted old memories, occasionally interrupted by bursts of laughter that seemed to vibrate through the stillness outside. Snow had begun to fall in soft flurries, blanketing the landscape in a pristine white layer that shimmered under the pale glow of a full moon. As midnight approached, the women decided to take photos in the snow. They bundled up in coats and scarves, their cheeks flushed from the alcohol and the warmth of the fire. Their steps were unsteady as they emerged into the freezing night, the crisp air sobering yet exhilarating. The soft crunch of snow underfoot mingled with their giggles as they stumbled toward a small clearing near the edge of the woods. Unbeknownst to them, they were dangerously close to a grizzly bear's den. The bear, A hulking creature that had settled into its winter rest weeks earlier was nestled deep within its shelter, its body lulled into light hibernation. But the women's laughter and stomping feet stirred the animal, waking it from its torpor. Grizzlies, especially during winter, are easily startled and highly territorial. The bear, disoriented and agitated, emerged from its den, its massive body moving with a primal ferocity born of fear and instinct. The women were oblivious to the danger until it was too late. Sarah, the first to notice the bear, froze in place, her eyes wide with disbelief. Jessica and Megan, still laughing, turned to see the massive figure lumbering toward them. Panic set in, but their alcohol-clouded minds dulled their reactions. Instead of retreating, they hesitated, their movements slow and disoriented. The bear, now fully alert and on edge, charged. Its first target was Sarah, who stood closest to the den. The bear struck her with a swipe of its enormous paw, knocking her to the ground. The force of the blow sent her sprawling, her scream piercing the cold night air. The bear was on her instantly, its jaws clamping with crushing power. Blood stained the pristine snow as the bear mauled her, its growls reverberating through the trees. Jessica, horrified but desperate to help, grabbed a nearby stick and charged at the bear, yelling and flailing in a futile attempt to distract it. The bear, now enraged, turned its attention to Jessica. It swiped at her with terrifying speed, its claws tearing through her jacket and into her flesh. Jessica crumpled to the ground, her cries of pain fading as the bear attacked her with the same relentless aggression. Megan, paralyzed with fear, stood a few feet away, screaming in desperation. The sight of her friends being mauled was too much to process, and her survival instincts finally kicked in. She turned to run but stumbled in the deep snow, her movements sluggish and uncoordinated. The bear, still driven by its primal instincts, pursued Megan. Her screams echoed through the forest as the animal caught up to her and dragged her down into the snow. She struggled, kicking and flailing, but the bear's strength was overwhelming. The last of her cries faded into the stillness as the bear finished its brutal attack. The scene was one of unimaginable horror. Blood was spattered across the snow, and the bodies of the 3 women lay scattered near the den. The bear, now agitated but no longer threatened, retreated into the woods, disappearing into the shadows as the landscape became eerily silent again. A nearby resident, whose cabin was less than a mile away, heard the women's screams and rushed outside with a flashlight. Like a warning bell, the sound had been chilling, cutting through the still night. By the time he arrived at the scene, the bear was gone, and he found a scene of devastation. The snow, once pristine, was now marred by crimson stains, and the lifeless bodies of the women lay where they had fallen. The neighbor immediately called authorities, his hands shaking as he described what he had found. Park rangers and wildlife officials arrived within the hour, their headlights cutting through the darkness as they assessed the scene. The gruesome discovery left no doubt about what had happened. The women's proximity to the bear's den, combined with their intoxication and lack of awareness, had created a perfect storm of circumstances that led to the tragedy. The rangers followed the bear's tracks but decided against pursuing it that night, instead of setting up monitoring equipment and traps to locate the animal later. The news of the attack spread quickly, shocking the local community and drawing national attention. The tragedy served as a grim reminder of the risks posed by the untamed wilderness, particularly when mixed with human carelessness. Wildlife experts stressed respecting nature's boundaries, especially where predators roam freely. The women's deaths, though preventable, highlighted the need for increased education on bear safety and the dangers of venturing into the wild while impaired. The park implemented new safety measures in the following weeks to prevent similar incidents. Signs warning visitors about the dangers of bear dens were placed in high-risk areas, and rangers conducted workshops on wildlife safety for locals and tourists. The incident also reignited debates about the balance between human recreation and wildlife conservation, with some calling for stricter regulations on activities near national parks.